Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to know if you can hear me okay, if you can hear the interpretation before we start. You can use the thumbs up. You can use the thumbs up. Great. Awesome. Thank you. All right. I hope you drank some coffee, some tea, something nice to wake up. I know it's 2 p.m. You've had a long day, but let's talk about a very important subject, at least for me and for the families that I serve. I hope it is useful for you guys, all the information that I will share. And at the end of the presentation, I hope you are able to apply what we discussed today in your workplace or as a family. Today, we will talk about, I will share my screen now. Today, we'll talk about promoting equitable access to language services for families of children and youth with special healthcare needs. Those families that don't speak English or speak very little English, that struggle with it. And before we start, I'd like to state that I don't have any relevant financial disclosures. The goals or objectives for my presentation will be to learn about the findings on language access and an analysis that we performed regarding what's the access, language access in the healthcare setting. We will learn more about the most common barriers that families, providers, and interpreters are facing when accessing or providing language services. Lastly, we will give you solutions and resources that you may use to share with other families or to apply it in your own practice or offices and share with all the people that are involved in the healthcare setting. Before we start, I'd like to know who you are representing today. If you are a service provider, if you are a family, or if you are a specialist, an interpreter, you have experience translating materials, you can let us know in the chat who you are representing today.
Okay, let's see. We have the question right here digitally so that you can submit your answer. All right, so 80% are providers, 13% is family members, and 7 others. So I hope that the providers can learn a lot about how the families feel about um, how do they feel when they want to get language access. All right, next. What is the purpose of this presentation? When we're doing a project right now where we promote the language access, specifically with children with special needs. And both have learning delays. So how important is to me go to the doctor and be able to explain in my language how is the development of my children, what are my concerns, and how can I absorb this information in a way that I can apply it with my children. So it is very important that I understand the provider and that the provider understands me. That is the purpose, the main purpose of this project. How do we educate the family to understand that they have a right to request this service, and how do we help the providers to offer this service in a more equitable way at the global level when we are talking with families where English is not their first language. Second question that I want to know about you. How much do you know about the language access law? All right, let's see the results. And this is important, and I want you to understand that this is a right that the patients have. So 22% knows a lot. Um, I am new in this topic. I don't have an expert. I don't have experience, 20%. So I hope many of you learn about language access because there is a limitation with regards to education about this topic. So we did an analysis about what areas there were gaps or about the knowledge on this topic. So the first thing we wanted to say was that there is a law, there is a right that covers people um, with regards to having language access. This law was signed in 1964 and it establishes that the right that a patient has to communicate in their preferred languages, also in receiving all the documents that are associated with their health about and in their language. And it is very important also to know that they have access to the language even if they don't have citizenship. um, this is very important when we talk about the language access rights. I have this infographic that we have sharing with the families, knowing what the rights are. And so communicating in their own language, families, um, um, how do they have access to this? So question number 3, what type of language access have you provide? What type of support to language access have you provide? So language access is commonly uh, interpretation via phone, in person, um, video interpretation, what we're using today, simultaneous interpretation, sign language. Let's see the results. The majority has used phone interpretation that only uses phone. Also, the in-person interpretation, 47%, and video interpretation, 32%. Translated documents, 45%. That number is very high. That's good. Sign language interpretation, 29%, and more than one of these, 34%. So in Family Voices, we did a full analysis for us to establish what are the barriers that families and providers have um, when they are trying to do language access. In this analysis, more than 600 people participated. This included patients, families, medical providers, and community workers. We included doctors and interpreters. We were able to see what was the story and what were the barriers of all of these people that all together we were um, able to make it accessible to family. The methods that we used was a survey that we shared. to family and providers, health providers. This survey was translated in more than 8 languages, and it was shared for about 4 weeks. We were surveying individuals that were providers, healthcare providers, and we were also doing focus groups with medical interpreters and families. And with this, in this way, we could ask more questions regarding to their experiences with this service. The survey that we did to the family, the main objective was to know from by them, like from them, what were their barriers and their challenges, and why do we still see that there are families that go to their provider and don't understand half of the things they're being told, that they receive a prescription and they don't know how are they supposed to apply this medicine when they go home. So it is very important for us that to hear from the families what is happening with them. What do I find? The majority of family survey families inform that they knew that they had a right to interpretation for free and to receive um, medical information in their language. However, 54% they knew that they had the right to complain about this if they didn't get this service. Also, less than half, 42% of the families informed that they um, felt comfortable when they have an interpreter in the room. Many people that don't speak English, they said that they felt comfortable when they had interpreters, but the bilingual people felt uncomfortable because they noticed that the translations were not very accurate. So that's the challenge that we found with the families. The families that didn't speak English shared that they receive many um, interpretations that are not accurate or confused. Sometimes the dialect that is used is not the best or is not applicable to their community or their culture. As we know, Spanish has 20 different dialects or more. So when somebody is offering an interpretation or a translation, we have to use always the most basic language, so it doesn't matter who is listening to it, whoever, they can understand what is going on. This is one of the challenges that we have in this analysis. Many of these were able to express frustration for not having the language access, and to have the labels of the medicines in their language, or how to do the test, or how to take the medicine in their own language. 29% of the surveyed families informed that the medical records of their children or themselves were translated. And as many of you are providers, for the families, it's very important to have the medical record of our children or our own records in our own language, especially when we have to see a specialist with like new geneticists. There is a lack of information in the native language of the families, and this is why very often we can see families that are confused, families that have that are overwhelmed with their emotions when they are with a geneticist, especially when they cannot understand what's happening with their children. In conclusion, what we could conclude in our analysis with the families, because we're also going to talk with the providers, the majority of the providers were not satisfied with the quality and precision of interpreters. We were able to interview interpreters and we are going to share with you what are the challenges of the interpreters. We have a very easy time saying like, yeah, the quality is bad, but honestly, their work is very difficult because they have to listen to us and understand exactly what we're saying. So that work is very difficult, and there are strategies to help the interpreter to do their job better. And that is one of the things that we would love to do once we finish this session. You can stay with them and apply it in your practice. The participants prefer the in-person interpretation. Many times when we are on the phone, we can listen to noises or the call can be cut off, and having that person next to you, it provides you safety and security. Many people prefer to have the in-person interpreter. Many patients are uncomfortable having an in-person interpreter because of confidentiality and privacy. So sometimes when we have a person, an interpreter in the living room, we have a reduced time because we have to wait for that interpretation. And also for the sheer fact that we really don't know if this person is going to keep it confidential or not. So this conversation with the family is very important to have this. The fact that this once we are with these families, we have to inform the families about HIPAA, for example, that protects the information of all the patients, but we don't know if this is applicable to the interpreter. So how this is applicable to interpreters, it's important. The majority um, of the people have this confused, and we're going to be talking about this in the future, but it is very important that we listen to the families, that we give the opportunity to the families to ask their questions in their language, in their language. For me, it is very important to be able to present to you in Spanish. I feel much more relaxed. I feel I can speak in my own language, that I can give you examples without thinking twice how to translate in my mind. So, how to be able to speak in your language change the dynamic, not only able the ability to express yourself, but emotionally has a big impact.
The concerns and experiences of the family respondents. It is important to highlight that the families notice the translation inaccuracies and other quality issues, the lack of access to interpretation services. Some providers tend to make certain assumptions or assume that the families don't need an interpreter. Many of you may think, well, I heard Roseani speaking English. Why do you think Roseani needs interpretation? Even if I am able to speak English, I I might feel more comfortable in Spanish. So you don't have to assume that I will be able to speak English just because I speak it. So certain instructions for medications are very important, and sometimes they're not translated. And many people express their frustration about not getting the necessary language access services. Here are some recommendations. It is very important to make adjustments in your practice in order to have information about the language access that is available to the providers. It is also important that families know that if they didn't receive good service, they can get in contact and file a claim for that. They need to promote strategies to increase family satisfaction with the accuracy and reliability of an interpreter and translation services. One way to do that is offering more translation and interpreting services. We need to promote opportunities for improving and enhancing language access services among providers with a focus on translation quality. Last year, I made a presentation with you guys about the importance of cultural adaptation when we are translating documents. We cannot translate word by word, and we have to offer quality translations, and we have to give them the forms need to be translated to their language. Some families are not comfortable signing a privacy document or a bill if it's not in their mother language. Reports, medication instructions, discharge documents. Sometimes those are not offered in their language. So I think this is a great time to start doing that. And we need to continue raising awareness of language access, of the law on language access. If you have a patient that's calling you to make an appointment, and if you offer this patient or you ask this patient if they have a language access need, that will change the dynamics that this family has completely. And they will be able to recommend other people to get services with you. So it is very important to know that this is a right that all patients have, and it's very important to validate it. And we have to work together in order to grant them the access that they need. Now, let's do another question. Let's ask you guys another question. Uh, we have two questions here. We have one for the providers. I would like to know if in your office or in the health system that you work for, you ask the patient what their preferred language is. And for the families, I would like to know if when you go to make an appointment with a provider, if you're asked what your preferred language is. Let's see the answers when they come up. All right. 74% says always. That's a very high rate. And 48% say of the families say always. They usually say what their preferred language is. Okay, I like those numbers. Now, let's talk about the provider survey for providers and what we found there. This is very interesting. We had a very high response from the providers. The number of providers was very high, and the purpose of the survey is to gain understanding of the challenges faced by healthcare providers related to using language access supports. Sometimes we cannot tell them that providers are not doing that. We have to hear them as well. And we wanted to know what those gaps were and or the challenges that they had in providing support to equitable language accesses, and what was the technical assistance that they had and the training needs to improve access to those services. That this is what we found. These were the 10 most commonly reported barriers that are surveyed reported. The lack of access to interpreters, including certain languages and dialects. We heard that they told us, Roseani, we tried, but when we call, there is nobody that speaks Vietnamese, there's nobody that speaks Russian. So we noticed a lack of access to interpreters. Certain time constraints or limits. We know that you have 20 minutes or half an hour in order to have an appointment with a patient. You see a patient and maybe they have only geneticists in the island in Puerto Rico, and they can only see 15 to 20 patients a day. And we know that they have very limited time. And with an interpreter, that time is even more limited because of the time of the translation. So we also have the cost or lack of sufficient resources, including video equipment. Sometimes they need a computer with a camera, with a microphone, and this is equipment that sometimes these clinics do not have, and this limits the access to language access. Connectivity issues when we are having appointments virtually, all of those things matter and take time, and inconsistent quality or skills among the interpreters is also another problem. And this is something that happens a lot, but we're going to see what the interpreters have to say about that and why the quality of their interpretation is not as accurate as we demand it to be. We also have the written information. Sometimes they don't have the forms uh, and they don't have the ways to translate this material. They have the personnel to translate discharge instructions in the moment when the patient is there with them. The interpreters lack sufficient medical knowledge, and this is also happens, and this might affect the quality of the interpretation. So it is so it is very important when we hire an interpreter that this interpreter has knowledge in genetics or in the field that he will be interpreting so that they are more accurate. There is no process in place for providers to confirm the translation accuracy. Right now, I'm talking to you, and Alisa doesn't know if what I'm saying in Spanish is wrong or right, if I'm making a grammar mistake. She has no way to know unless I give them the documents in English, or she could listen to an interpretation. And these are the things that the providers tell us. And of course, when we use telehealth, which is very common in genetics, the portals are not translated and the instructions are not translated. How do we help these patients to gain access to telehealth, and that language access could be incorporated when using these technologies? Now, let's talk about the conclusions. The reported barriers to accessing language access services included limited access to interpreters, especially for certain languages and dialects, time constraints, cost or lack of sufficient resources, technical and connectivity issues, and long wait times. Many respondents reported that despite the issues, they believe interpreter services are valuable and they are critically important, and they can changing the interaction as a whole of how the patient feels when they are with a provider. So language access does change the interaction with the patient. That satisfaction um, increases if they receive services in their preferred language. Recommendations. It is important to understand patients' and families' language access rights. And as providers, you might have certain private practices, and in private practices, you can establish what your rules are going to be. What is the way in which you will perform your practices? If most of you are part of a healthcare system, and there are certain ways in which you can recommend that this service is consistent and equitable, especially when we talk to specialists, just like most of you, specialists that these families need. These families need this service in order to treat the conditions of their children, and they have to know what the diagnosis of their children is. this family, in order for them to understand what the genesis is going to say, that is the first step for a full treatment, and they have to understand what the root of this problem is, what is happening in the body of that child, so that they can understand what will continue happening later on. And you have to understand this, and you need to take that into account so that the families can uh, have access to this service. We have to communicate and promote language access rights, and we have to prepare ourselves for the visits with interpreters. They will give you some recommendations, but the provider has to prepare when they have an appointment with an interpreter. This is very important. This can change everything. Paul, question number 5, before we start with the focus groups. How do you feel about having an interpreter present during your medical appointment? And this could be you as a provider, or this could be you as a family. Um, Maybe you like it, maybe it's a headache, gives you a headache. What do you think? You can be honest. Okay, let's look at the results. 35%, 36% says they like it. 15%, I like it a lot. 20%, I don't care either way. And 5% says I don't like it at all. Okay, not bad. Now, I'd like to talk to you about what the families, providers, and interpreters told us about all the questions that we could ask them directly in the focus groups. The interpreters were very honest. We only interviewed medical interpreters, so certified interpreters that are certified in the medical field. The purpose of this focus group was to understand the challenges they face when offering interpretation services to families, specifically with families that have um, special needs, or whether they have a special need. The interpreters were very honest with us. They talk about a stigma, a very strong stigma about the belief that not speaking English is a weakness. And I tell you that as a Puerto Rican, my main language is English, and they do look at you differently. I lived for 12 years in the United States. I got sick like 12 times, and I left the appointment without really telling the doctor how I felt. I wasn't brave enough to request interpretation services, and this would lead to to think that the treatment was going to be longer, or that they will give me a medication that was not working because I was not being fully honest with the provider. So that stigma is very evident, and it exists, and you can see that in the providers and the interpreters. The families that want to use a bilingual child or a family member to interpret instead of a professional interpreter. This happens a lot, especially in the Hispanic community. So this happens because, and let's not generalize that, but most of the people, most of the Hispanic people, and we believe the people, we trust the people that we are referred to, and we need to
Yes,
establish that trust.
trust. We feel a little bit uncomfortable to talk about our personal things when there is a person that we don't know, a person that we don't know if they are interpreting exactly what I am saying, and we prefer my aunt, my uncle, my grandfather, my son that can interpret because there is a little bit more trust there. That stigma is there. There is a lack of uh, connection to the internet. They told us that it is a problem, especially in the hospitals. They are using connectivity at the same time. It's very important that the patient sees the interpreter. So in general, we have to keep the camera on, and that can limit the connectivity. This occurs a lot, especially when we are talking about small communities. One of the people that we were interviewing was a person from Hawaii. When you have a diagnosis that involves genetics, perhaps a few patients in a community, 5, 6, 10, very few. So that interpreter is probably it probably knows the entire community. So um, how possible it is for the families to openly speak in front of an interpreter that they already know is in the community. So this can have a big impact and the effectivity of the interpreter. The access to or lack of male interpreters, whether it's for cultural rules, there are more women that interpret. But at the same time, there are men that want male interpreters so that they can open up and talk about their medical needs and concerns openly. So there is a lack of male interpreters. And in many families, also, they still use masks. They demand that the interpreters wear masks, and that can affect the interpretation. Let's remember that interpretation is not only exactly what they is spoken. You have to do the tone of voice, the facial expressions, um, um, and the participants have the interpreters that participate say that the most effective interpretation is the one in person. Obviously, they miss a lot when it's in person because they are not paid for the time they spend on the road, and very often they arrive to the facility, and if the family doesn't arrive, that session doesn't get paid to them. So they have challenges when we are using in-person interpretation. They also inform that the interpreters prefer, or family prefer in-person interpretation, and they can help with written interpretation, so they can play different roles when they are in person, and it increases the trust. Mm, they also share that it's very important that that they provide a summary of what that interpretation is going to be, how much information they can know ahead of the meeting before they meet with the patient. Very often they have to provide information that's very strong, very difficult, and maybe the family doesn't have any type of time to process the information. So that can affect the interpretation at that moment. A few recommendations are to offer that the interpretation in person can be planned, and strengthen the skills of the providers in how to work with interpreters. We, in particular, we offer the presentations ahead of time to the interpreters so that they can have a more effective interpretation. Right now, uh, we're doing bilingual presentations so that the interpreter can have access to the information in the language, and that can help. And also, we offer to the family information before that the interpreter can arrive to them, that there is a privacy, and that there is a law that covers them so that the information remains between the patient, the interpreter, and the provider, and to continue um, create consciousness about the language access law. So this is the last question, I think. Share with us, how would you advocate for language access? How would you do that? If you are providers, right? How would you recommend? What would you do if you can defend language access? What would be the first step? We want to give the opportunity to the providers first, but the families are going to have time too. You can write it in English and Spanish, make it part of your protocol. Yes, to do it consistently. What else can you do? Help with the technology. Yes, that is very good. That's part of my recommendations. To have signage. Yes, we ask out of the 600 people they that we interview, they have not seen signage to say that there is language access. Yes, very good. Ask the patients what is their preferred language so that they can have these documents translated. Um, so that the people can educate others. To hire providers that are the language, that would be the ideal world, to go to the US to say, I want my geneticist, my GYN, to all of them in Spanish. That is difficult um, with this, with language access. And the families have something to share. Yes, it's very important through this to have interpretation, but that's a conversation that you have to have with your provider, because the secretary or the or whoever is carrying out the appointment, they can take into consideration that perhaps the person that needs an interpreter can have additional time, and perhaps this is not possible in each session, but to allot that time before scheduling the appointment. And community resources. I won't go without giving you many resources for you to know more about language access. Thank you, Fred. We're going to share my screen. I want to give you some suggestions, because sometimes we talk about problems, and we don't give solutions. So we want to share what suggestions to give in terms of that analysis for the providers in regards to the hospital. First of all, to confidentiality. Sometimes we don't say this and we don't know where this family is coming from. It's important to underscore that this information, even when we have an interpreter in the room, it's confidential. We have to continue to build trust and listen to the families, and given the opportunity uh, to have a list and prepare for that appointment with the genetist. and that geneticist creates this link or this trust bond with the family. Sometimes not share personal opinions with the family. Sometimes when we hear a provider and they start telling us about what happened with another patient or with a family member, we really lose sight of what this family is trying to share. And we don't provide transportation to the family. Here in Puerto Rico, this is a big problem. Right now, if many people, I live in the east of the island, and the three geneticists that live in Puerto Rico live 45 minutes away. So how do we help the family to overcome those barriers? And we have to keep the perspective to increase the availability of interpreters. This is not just with you, but if you are inside a hospital, there is a system where we can make suggestions about how to improve this service. Um, right? We don't want to discriminate, but it is very important to hire personnel that is adequate to the community that you're serving. So if you are providing services in a Hispanic community, or the majority speaks Chinese or Mandarin, well, that is the type of personnel that you have in your practice, and to offer uh, more training to providers, especially in how to work with interpreters, so that this time is effective. Um, Signage, very important. Um, we put put some signage saying, like, do you need language access, speak to my secretary, or to provide a lot of information to the interpreter, the information about the appointment, so that the interpreter can go well prepared. We want to learn from you. So I want to share a link so that you can share with us what is your experience with families that whose preferred language is not English. It takes 4 minutes. Fred is going to share it in the chat, and you can complete it and know more the um, about the information. This presentation is going to be shared with everybody. You're going to have access, but I wanted to share that we have a web page, a full web page, um, with all resources for families, providers, interpreters, and these resources were made for you to educate, and we don't want to point anyone at anyone, and we want to be able to show everyone in an equal light. Um, we want this to we want to know that this is the best for our children. The best way is to communicate in an effective way. And I invite you to scan the QR code, and otherwise the presentation is going to be shared with you, so to access to all the services that are available in English and Spanish.
We are currently working on a full curriculum that we will create for families and providers, and also for interpreters, for them to learn about strategies not only regarding the law on language access, but what it includes and what strategies we can use in the health environment in order to improve these services. These trainings and workshops will be offered in an online learning system. We will have a platform in which you can take those workshops at your convenience. We will have them available in 3 different languages. So if you're interested in having access to this information, I will leave you a link um, so that you can sign up. This will be completely free of charge, both for families and providers. You can also scan the QR code in order to sign up. Now, I will leave this on the screen, the QR code on the screen, in case you would like to scan it. I'd like to know how much time I have left. Fred, could you please tell me how much time I have left for questions?
Yes, there's 8 minutes remaining, Roseani.
Okay, any questions, doubts, comments? Did you like the presentation? Did you find it useful? Tell me about it. Well, I'm here reading your messages. Eva Leaves suggests that the appointment is recorded so that this could be revisited later. This is something that has to be discussed with the provider and the family because the information needs to be kept confidential. So this is something that may be arranged with the family. There is someone that has risen their hand. Guadalupe. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this very important talk. I have a question regarding the law. We know that the law exists, but we know that not all providers have these services available for their patients. So what would be the way, um, and I'm asking you that you know a little bit more because I attended a very similar conference about this law. I would like to know in what way we can tell the providers that this exists. We don't have this service, but how can we motivate them so that they can demand the services? This is very important. I think that is our main goal to why we're doing this workshop and training. Many of the families that when they come to their appointments, they don't dare to ask for these services, and sometimes they just it's a culture thing. They say that don't have they're not they don't they fear that they're not going to be treated equally. So there is a certain way of thinking that to help them understand that this is necessary and there is a process in which you can file a claim officially so that these providers feel um, that is that it is mandatory to offer this service, and it is important to have a protocol as well. I cannot just go to the appointment that it's going to be in 3 weeks and then just show up there and demand an interpreter. And I think it is responsibility of the family as well to communicate that in the beginning so that the provider can arrange that and readjust the appointment and have the interpretation ready for the day of the appointment. It's it's a right that the patient has, but every right has certain responsibilities and obligations. So that's how we can uh, work with it. This is your right, but this is the way that you can ask for it. And we cannot just demand the provider to give us that when we're not giving them the opportunity to offer that service. I agree with you, but for those providers that don't have um, the payment of interpreters in their budget, and in that case, how does the law impact them here in the United States? There are many ways in which the provider can support the family when the provider doesn't have the budget or the funds for it. Um, Even if it's a private office or if they're working in a hospital or clinic, this is a law. So should be established in each of the institutions. We also have the insurance agencies. Some of them can provide an interpreter for your appointments with certain specialists. So families have several options when the provider doesn't offer that service. Sometimes the insurance services can cover that. Thank you very much. Hi, Maria. Hi, thank you. I love the talk. Um, one regarding having interpreters, if the institution receives $1 or more from the federal government, they have to have interpreters for the patients. And I understand that this might be a very small practice and they might not have the money in order to pay the interpreters. This is something that we've heard many years, and the comparison that I give them generally is that years ago when we started having computers and all that, we we talked to the person that knew more about the computers in order to fix them. We knew that we didn't have the money in order to fix them with a technician, but then when computers started being more important and prominent, we hired certain specialists because we had a bigger infrastructure. And we have to apply the same mentality for interpreters. It's something that needs to be part of the budget. If you have a computer, you need to have a budget for interpreters. If you have a printer, you need to have a budget for interpreters as well. So it's a mutual education for families, for them to know that this is part of the law. If Medicaid is paying them, this is federal government. If Medicare is paying them, it's federal government. So, and so on. So it's the law that they have to have interpreters. I don't know if that helps you. Yes, that helps me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria. Any other comment or question? I know that we only have 1 minute left. Well, I left our website in chat. That's where you can find more information on the law, how to file a claim, how providers can support families better, for interpreters as well. And there's a lot of information that you can share with other people. You can print it, you can have it available in your office. And if you have any questions, my contact information will be there in the presentation. Thanks. Thank you so much, Nightmag, and thanks to everyone that supported my participation here.